In the Middle Ages, a killer stalked the globe, a phantom that wiped out nearly half the population of Europe. For centuries, nobody knew its name. They only knew it felt like the end of the world, a divine punishment that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Today, thanks to modern science, we know its name. We know where it was born. We've solved the case. But what about a different kind of medieval mystery? What about a crime that left behind no bodies, no murder weapon, no confession? A cold case centered on two young boys, princes who were the key to a kingdom, and who one day just disappeared. In this video, we'll use 21st century science to solve one of history's greatest cold cases, only to walk straight into another that technology for now still can't touch. Part 1. The Black Death, a mystery solved. 14th century Europe was a world teetering on the edge, crowded, filthy, and deeply religious. Life was governed by the seasons, the church, in this profound sense that divine judgment was right around the corner, and in 1347, it looked like Judgment Day had finally arrived. It came on Genoa's trading ships, a silent passenger that slipped ashore in the ports of the Mediterranean. It started with fever and chills. Then came the telltale sign, the symptom that would give this plague its unforgettable name. The BIBO, painful, swollen lymph nodes, the size of an apple that turned black and oozed pus. For most, death was agonizing and almost certain. The pandemic we now call the Black Death was one of the most devastating events in human history, killing up to half the people in the hardest-hit regions. To them, this was the apocalypse, and they asked the same question we would. What is this, and where on earth did it come from? Their answers were a product of the world they lived in. Was it a punishment from God? Millions thought so, turning to prayer, fasting, and even frantic processions of flagellants, whipping themselves in the streets as a form of public penance. Others blamed a poison in the air, a miasma, and in a terrifying turn, many looked for human scapegoats, unleashing horrific violence on minority communities. For more than 600 years, the real killer remained a terrifying ghost. The case was cold, the trail seemingly lost forever. But it wasn't. The evidence was just waiting, buried in the mass graves and plague pits dug in desperation across the continent. Fast forward to our time, and scientists decided to reopen the case file, not with dusty old books, but with DNA sequencers. In places like a London plague pit, they drilled into the teeth of skeletons, the one part of the body that can lock away DNA for centuries. And they found it, the genetic ghost of the killer. What they discovered was definitive. The Black Death wasn't a curse or bad air. It was a bacterium, Yersinia pestis. It's the same bug that can cause plague today. But they'd found its medieval ancestor, the perpetrator of one of history's greatest crimes. Science had the murder weapon. The next question was obvious. Where did it come from? For years, that question was fiercely debated, but thanks to an incredible international team of researchers, we now have an answer that is shockingly precise. They chased the genetic trail back in time using ancient DNA as a roadmap. They found a big bang of plague diversity, a single point where the strain responsible for the Black Death seemed to burst into existence. The clues led them thousands of miles from Europe all the way to Central Asia. Near Lake Issyk-Kul, in the mountains of modern-day Kyrgyzstan, archaeologists back in the 1880s had found a pair of cemeteries. The tombstones, dated to 1338 and 1339, had a chillingly simple cause of death etched into them: pestilence. This was almost a decade before the plague tore through Europe. When modern scientists revisited this old find, they analyzed DNA from the remains in those graves, and bingo, they found the ancestor of the Black Death. They'd found ground zero, a local strain of Yersinia pestis, probably circulating in rodents like marmots, had made the jump to humans in this trading community. Situated on the bustling Silk Road, this community then became patient zero for the Western world, unknowingly carrying the disease with them. Fleas on the black rats in their caravans became tiny vessels of contagion, carrying the plague from one town to the next in a slow, invisible march of death that eventually hit the ports of Europe and just exploded. The mystery that terrorized a continent that was blamed on God and the stars was finally solved. It was a microscopic organism traced from a London graveyard all the way back to a specific strain in a specific place in a specific year. A 600-year-old cold case closed by science. We just saw how science can reach back centuries and give us a definitive answer to one of history's biggest questions. It's an amazing reminder that the past isn't really past. It's full of secrets just waiting for us to find them. If you get a kick out of solving history's mysteries like this, do us a favor and subscribe to the channel. We've got so many more cases to crack. Part 2. The Princes in the Tower, a new mystery. But what happens when the science is there, but it can't be used? When the evidence isn't buried in the bones of millions, but in the silence of an empty room. This brings us from a mystery of biology to a mystery of ambition and blood. The disappearance of the princes in the tower. To get this, you have to picture one of the most brutal periods in English history. The Wars of the Roses. It was a decades-long savage civil war between two rival branches of the royal family. The House of Lancaster and the House of York, battling for the English crown. By 1483, the Yorkists had won. King Edward IV was on the throne, a charismatic, battle-hardened king. He had two young sons, 12-year-old Edward, the Prince of Wales, and 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York. The future of the dynasty looked totally secure. Then, in April 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly. Just like that, the kingdom was plunged into chaos. The new king, Edward V, was just a boy. Suddenly, the most powerful man in England was the boy's uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who was named Lord Protector of the realms. And this is where the trail goes cold. Richard intercepted the young king on his way to London for his coronation. He had both Edward V and his little brother Richard taken to the Tower of London, which was a royal palace, as well as a prison, supposedly for their own safety. Then the Lord Protector made his move. In a stunning power play, Richard announced that his late brother's marriage to the boy's mother had been illegitimate, and if their parents were never legally married, the two princes were bastards and couldn't inherit the crown. With his nephews out of the way, Richard claimed the throne for himself and was crowned King Richard II in July 1480. The two boys, who just months earlier held the future of England in their hands, were now prisoners. They were spotted a few times in the gardens of the tower that summer, and then they were gone. They vanished from the pages of history, leaving behind an unnerving silence and a question that has haunted historians for over 500 years. What happened to the princes? The prime suspect, then and now, has always been their uncle, King Richard II. He had the motive. As long as those boys were alive, they were a threat to his crown. He had the means and the opportunity. He controlled the tower. And it's hard to believe they could have been murdered without his permission. The historians who wrote the history books after Richard's death, the Tudors, certainly painted him as a monster who killed his nephews to secure his power. But here's the thing. For all the finger-pointing, there's no smoking gun. No witnesses ever came forward. No confession was ever found. And most importantly, no bodies were ever produced. Richard never showed the boys, dead or alive, shut down the rumors that were tearing his kingdom apart. It was the perfect crime, a disappearance so clean it left behind nothing but a thick fog of suspicion. The case took a bizarre twist almost 200 years later, in 1674. Workmen digging out a staircase in the White Tower unearthed a wooden box holding the skeletons of two small children. Convinced they were the long-lost princes, the king at the time, Charles II, had the remains placed in an urn and buried with honors in Westminster Abbey, where they still are today. And this is where modern science, which so brilliantly solved the riddle of the Black Death, hits a brick wall. The obvious next step is to test the DNA from the bones in that urn. Scientists even have a living relative on the all-female line to compare it to, making an identification totally possible. But the test has never been done. For decades, both the royal family and the Church of England have refused all requests to examine the remains. The main argument is that it could set a dangerous precedent for digging up royals every time a new historical theory pops up. There's been some chatter that King Charles III is more open to the idea. But for now, the door remains shut. The very tool that gave us the origin of the plague is just out of reach. We can pull DNA from a 600-year-old tooth in a mass grave, but we're forbidden from touching the potential remains of 2 English princes. The science is ready and waiting, but the mystery is locked away by tradition. Conclusion. So, here we are, with 2 of medieval history's greatest mysteries. One was a biological catastrophe on a global scale, a puzzle solved by chasing a genetic fingerprint from its millions of victims all the way back to the source. The truth, it turned out, was written in their bones. The other mystery is the complete opposite. It's not about millions, it's about 2 children. It's not a story of biology, but of raw human ambition. And it remains unsolved precisely because the most crucial piece of evidence, the very bones that might hold the answer, is shielded from the one tool that could give us the truth. One story shows the incredible power of science to light up the past. The other shows its limits when it runs up against centuries of human tradition. In the end, maybe that's what history is. It's what we can prove, and it's what we're left to piece together from shadows and whispers. Some truths are coded in our DNA, while others might just be lost forever in the silence of an empty room in the tower. What do you think happened to the princes? Was Richard III the cold-blooded villain Shakespeare made him out to be? Or is he the victim of 500 years of bad PR? Let us know your theory in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the past, don't forget to like this video and subscribe.